In the North, there was freedom, but you have hirelings of the slave masters who would come to the North and just take any free black or any person back to the South and claim that he was a slave, and the government sanctioned this. Duffield Street runs right into Fulton Street, which runs right into what is Weeksville. If you don't know, Weeksville was a settlement of free blacks, which was settled approximately 1838. The important thing about Weeksville, and another thing which is not in the history books, is that tremendous racial violence in both Manhattan and in downtown Brooklyn here. So that when fugitive slaves would come in, most of them went straight to New York City, which is over here, but some of them came in through these old slave outlets in Gravesend, in Jamaica, and these roads all led to Weeksville. So you have a tremendous railroad that runs through Brooklyn. And what do you do with these slaves? It's a good question. What do you do with these slaves? And this is the problem I have with the latest AKRF report, is that you have fugitive slaves that are being transported through Manhattan and through Brooklyn, and how do you hide them? How do you hide them? The police stations are right in the metropolitan area. And that's another thing that we have to do. We have not studied where the locations of police stations are. But what you would do now is construct tunnels. They say there are tunnels all over Brooklyn, and I understand that they found some tunnels across the street here. The history of Brooklyn has been virtually neglected. There are only two general histories of Brooklyn that are done by contemporary scholars, and they talk about the system. They don't talk about the black experience.
I think that's why I get into a lot of trouble, because I believe in the people. You know, once they know and they see, I believe they'll do something about it.
We came here and we found a structure over here. We didn't know what the structure was.
The black history of Brooklyn has never been written. So no one can sit here and say A or B is a fact when you have not just researched it. When you don't know what it is, you can't say that it is yes and no. And that leads us to Duffield Street.
What we did is we put on it so people can see an easy entrance to this. This is one of those parts of the building, that the external entrance to the building. And if you look over there, you can look down there into the shaft, and you can see this shaft was used by people who wanted to have access to the sub-basement.
This whole program is about the Underground Railroad in Brooklyn, which is a subject which has never been discussed until 2004, when the city decided to tear down this row of houses on Duffield Street. In that year, 2004, they discovered some underground tunnels, which are part of an underground railroad. They discovered abolitionists living in this along this block, and the city, of course, was not concerned with history, so they decided to ignore all of that and tear it down. Now, what does that have to do with us? What does that have to do with history? The reason for that is that we have to start worrying about preservation of history. If we don't preserve our history, we have lost it. What's the famous saying, those who don't know their history are condemned to repeat it. So we have to understand a little bit more about what the Underground Railroad is and why it's important to preserve these houses rather than tear them down. What we want to talk about is how the city is bolstering their case by using an AKRF report. AKRF is a group of it's an architectural firm. It's not a historical, it's not a university. There were no, they hired academicians, but this is, what's the old saying? This is trying to prove the obvious. The report simply does what AKRF or what the EDC wanted them to do, is to prove that there is no Underground Railroad activity on Duffield Street.
The plan is not about preservation. The plan is about removal. The plan is about gentrification. The plan is about continuing the omission of history, of not just Africans who were enslaved. A lot of folks were entwined in this. So what we do is erase much of our history. And that's easy to do because most of us didn't know it anyway. So when you talk about it, it's foreign to the majority of the people.
141, 143, which is the vacant lot that was Reverend Peck's house.
In 1855, the Paris Company published a map of Brooklyn, and it was for the use of fire insurance companies. So it showed a lot of details about the houses. It showed their materials in a color-coded key, and it also showed where there were connections between the houses. Now, in the case of Duffield Street, there's been a lot of back and forth about whether there were connections between these houses underground. The 1855 Paris map clearly shows that there were such connections. They went between the vaults under the areaways at the street front, at the cellar level. Below the basement level was the cellar. The cellar was a dark place, often with an earth floor, and it is the cellars that communicated among these houses.
We want desperately to open that tunnel, but of course, if we open the tunnel, the city's going to immediately say, we built that tunnel overnight, right? And it was never there, and blah, blah, blah. So that's what we got. We have this problem. We'd love to dig around here. We'll say, if we find any artifacts over here, man, it'll say, we put it there. That's what the city does. They twist everything that we have offered them. So this is the likelihood, and this is what we believe happened over here in this basement.
I say communicated because the key to the Paris map uses that word. They say dashes indicate a communicating building, and I think you might want to put this on camera. Dashes, buildings communicating, and there are the dashes, and there is the house.
Then 145, which was the Hall's house, who were abolitionists, and a member of Plymouth Church.
Before 1840, it was just the American Anti-Slavery Society. That was run by Garrison. By 1840, Lewis Tappan, who was a Brooklynite, split with Garrison, and he organized the American and Foreign Anti-Slavery Society. And this was a society that really helped free blacks to freedom. Now, by 1847, Tappan is helped by Henry Ward Beecher, the founding of Plymouth Church. That part gets into the literature. The other part does not. How the vigilance committees operated between Manhattan and Brooklyn. And that's what Duffield Street is all about.
Harriet Truesdell, the owner of this house, and her friend Julia Tappan were both delegates to the American Women's Anti-Slavery Convention, the National Convention in Philadelphia in 1838. They were both on the committee that decided the program. So that was a committee of, I believe, 12 or 16 people. No question, but they were together then. This was a pretty upsetting event because a lot of people in Philadelphia were pro-slavery.
Duffield is significant because it was downtown Brooklyn, where there was heavy human traffic of Africans, many of them who were enslaved, escaping enslavement, seeking liberation. So it's really not just Duffield, but it just so happened that Duffield Street is significant also because of churches. And there's no accident that churches were always safe havens, because sometimes churches got a little leeway. You know, folks were not under as much scrutiny as other facilities. So you could, and then churches made it their business to go about assisting folks, not just in the buildings themselves, but in the institutions themselves, but in the surrounding areas. And it was always connected. So again, it's only obvious that Duffield Street had the back side of Bridge Street Church. When you are escaping, you don't go out the front door. You go to your least resistant area, and that would be the back.
So there was only two entrances to the sub-basement, in the front and the back. By the city calling it a coal chute, what they were doing was a gross lie, a fantastic gross lie, because there was no way into this basement except those two fronts. If both of them are coal chutes, how'd you get in here?
One thing that has never gotten in the history is that Henry C. Bowen, who was Tappan's son-in-law, founded what's now called Bridge Street Church, which is on Bridge Street between Myrtle and Johnson. Tappan's brother founded that church in about 1843. And we now know that there are tunnels and passageways in that church which help free slaves or help to hide fugitive slaves. What you don't know is, what is that relationship between Bridge Street Church and Duffield Street? Well, it's only a block away. It's only a block away. So you have secret passageways, you have tunnels in Bridge Street, which lead out the back of the church onto Duffield Street.
So the tunnel does exist over here, and this was entrance into and out of these buildings. But here was the thing that really got us. Right over here, we were looking around one day, and the light shone on this rock formation. If you look at this rock formation, it does not look like flagstone at all. The entire basement is made of flagstone except this one spot. And then we looked a little further and we noticed that above it, there's an arch. And I say, why would you have an arch? Now, an arch is used for strength. That's what it does. It makes something very strong. And so therefore they made an arch over here and they rolled a rock in here. And we believe that this rock, when rolled back, will entrance into the tunnel.
That would be a part of your underground movement. That's how you have tunnels, that's how you have alleys, that's how you have different kinds of passageways. Remember, we were talking about people, many of whom had traveled from the South. There was no American Express, all right? There was no JetBlue, right? There were no highways, except the human highways and traffic. So folks had to make it on their own, even into new areas, strange places. Now you picture yourself running as a fugitive from folks who are out to get you, sending you back to a hellhole. You don't know the layout of the land. Somebody has to tell you, has to give you certain kinds of messages, right? So you go into a church, and when it's time to evacuate, you have to follow what other people have done. And there are people who have been doing this for years. So they have established escape routes throughout. Anybody does that when you're escaping folks who are getting ready to do you harm, because you had anywhere from imprisonment to re-imprisonment to lynchings to rapes to death, to return to the plantations, which were also death.
There are tunnels all over Brooklyn. And what we're going to do over the summer, I hope, is to start exposing and studying some of these tunnels. Now, what does that have to do with Duffield Street? First thing you must pay attention to is there were a number of abolitionists on Duffield Street so far, thanks to Joy Chattel and a couple of Louis Greenstein, they brought to our attention the fact of the major abolitionists who lived at this address, 227 Duffield Street, was Thomas Truesdell. Thomas Truesdell was that's another problem with history. We only study the big shots. We don't study the lower echelons of anti-slavery societies, abolitionists. But he was a lower echelon. I guess the best thing is to call him a member. But he happened to be a personal friend of William Lloyd Garrison through his wife.
Blacks aren't entitled to a museum. We're not entitled to anything to commemorate such a horrible thing that happened to us. We can't have anything, especially when the city knows that the abolitionists lived there. The woman almost lost her life in Pennsylvania at a convention for abolition and for the women's abolitionist movement. They burnt that building down, and that woman was in there, the Harriet Lee Truesdell. Everyone knows it. I'm not telling you anything that's not fact. It took us a while to get all the facts together and to make sure that what I was told was for real, but we got it. I had to go to North Carolina to find Lou's house, and that was by a fluke. A woman was showing me things on the Underground Railroad. I happened to see Levi Coffin's house, and it says he's the father of the Underground Railroad, and I says, oh my God, it's similar to Lou's. This abnormality is the same thing he has in his basement. The well, the fireplace, even the shelving is the same.
Most people who are scholars of the Underground Railroad want to see several different kinds of evidence. They would call that corroboration. They want to see oral history evidence, they want to see physical evidence, and they want to see historical written evidence. And sometimes you don't get all three. It's very important to people who want to deny that this house was involved so that they can tear it down with a clear conscience. It's very important to show that there's something, that there was no physical possibility, no passageway underground that could have got people from one house to another if you were having to leave quickly. Another issue that they attempted to mask is that there are places where you can get out into the backyard from the cellar. They brought in an architectural expert who said that was a ventilation shaft. Well and good. However, you've seen them. They're quite big enough for a man with a ladder to get out through them.
We want an honest appraisal, not people coming in and out lying to us, saying this is a coal chute when this was not. We were told by a man from the buildings department who came down and unofficially told us that you never put coal chutes in the sub-basement because coal dust, there's no movement of air down here, as you can see. And coal dust down here would lead, if you have fire, you'd automatically have an explosion. So coal dust would be very dangerous down here.
They know that this is an abolitionist house. They knew it when they asked Dr. Swan, before they asked anybody about anything, before the study even started, before we were handed letters. They came to Dr. Swan and asked him about 227, not 235, not 225, but 227, because I guess they wanted to know how much of a headache 227 was going to be to them, you see.
They obfuscated. That was unfortunate. They were also, in my view, quite unfair in their assessment of the oral history. Now, I think you're going to talk to someone who attempted to give them oral history, which I don't have that experience. It apparently was far from a pleasant experience. However, in the end, the transcripts that were made of the interviews, according to AKRF's own account, no one would sign off on those transcripts of what they said. So they're not printed in this report. So what they have done, they have restated without saying who said it, always using the passive voice. It is said that slaves were concealed in bales of cotton, they say. They make it say, it is Albert Chattel reportedly said They talk as if they were in court. They talk as if everything that was said was not true. It is extremely insulting. And they make mistakes.
It's not only with the oral history, it's with the entire document.
Document is
The thing that people don't understand is that the peer reviewers were there to evaluate the information that was collected by the researchers, whoever they were, who are not named. And what's important to understand is that the researchers, when they wrote their final report, they say they have research A, B, C, D, and D, and E, and whatever. There's tons and tons of research, and evidently this never got to the peer reviewers. So the question is, and the major historical criticism about the whole report is it says, I've done A, B, C, and D research, and I've come up with nothing. Nothing. Well, how can you come up with nothing if you've done tons and tons of research? More importantly, they don't even reference their sources. If you say, I've done research on, let's say, the American Anti-Slavery Society, well, where's the data? Show me your facts. What information did you give to the peer reviewers? Peer reviewers have never had anything. The peer reviewers were working mainly on my work. That's in the second draft, but the final draft, all they're doing is corroborating what the researchers said, which says we found nothing. So the peer reviewers are going to simply repeat that,
They had nothing. They were giving nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
They weren't even given a tour. One of the peer reviewers came down here from upstate New York just to see this house after I sent them papers about the house and what was going on. He came down and immediately rewrote his findings. Based on what he saw, he changed his findings, and that's what it said. And he gave me a copy of it. He emailed me a copy of it.
In the report, the consultant says that they will not print the texts of the oral history interviews, but they will summarize them. And they do not tell the names of the people who gave the interviews or how many of them are, any concrete facts that would help us to know what we were looking at. But they summarize them, and then they start attacking what they say the people said. And that is where we were with the attack on someone calling Juliana Tutman Julia, which was her nickname. This is a 760-page report. There's a great deal that is of uncertain validity. But I think the greatest problem with it is that the people who wrote it don't want to know.
Only thing this plan does is continues to omit and deny, as though crucial parts of our history never existed.
They're changing their terms. First it's the basement, then it's the sub-basement, then it's the cellar, then it's the basement, and it's like three-card Monte. And everyone gets very confused about what was where. They never put any photographs in this report of what is here. They never put a plan of a 19th century townhouse so that people could understand and use the normal uniform terminology, which is basement, cellar.
It needs to be taught, because I'm going to tell you something. I remember very plain, and I went to a private Catholic school where they tried to make me read this book, Little Black Sambo. And I said, oh no, that's not even happening. I remember that I was in 5th grade, and I said, you got to be kidding. And they said, well, we want you to read it. And I said, no, I am not reading it. And they were going to throw me out of school because I wasn't going to read it. And my mother told them, I left school and went home, which was around the corner. My mother came back up and told them that if they threw me out of school or tried to make me read something that was demeaning, she was going to sue them. She was going to publicize it. Now, I remember something like that, and that's very negative, Can you imagine what would happen if our kids remember something that had to do with slavery and this that was negative, but was turned into something positive. They don't even know that where the word "the real McCoy" came from. The real McCoy was a phrase coined by a black man who made this pin for a train to stay together. And a lot of people tried to copy it, but it would break. And they said, no, we want the real McCoy. You see, there's a lot of things that they need to know. They need to know that we invented the iron to make work light. The iron board, that we invented so many things, the traffic light, the filament for a light bulb. They need to know this. And they definitely need to know why. We did it out of need because it made our work, our slave work, easier.
If we are interested in really doing something for Brooklyn, I think that the people who want to have a plan need to sit down with folks who have knowledge of the area, have a sense of the history of it, the culture, the importance of it, and move back to what was in that law that I discussed around commemoration, education, and preservation. That's real. Folks understand that and make that happen. I would see having institutions of learning that could teach everybody about it, since New York State has failed to do that on purpose. New York City, New York State in general, and the federal. I would see actually using this as a time to have an open world of education throughout Brooklyn, to talk about the significance of it, not just related to downtown Brooklyn, like I said, but to the rest of Long Island, to upstate New York, to Canada, to all of the places that it impacted over the years that has basically been omitted.
New York was the second largest slave owning state in the nation. The second largest. South Carolina was the first. I thought once you came north, you were free, but we were not free. And there's no museums to celebrate or commemorate what our people had to go through. Blacks, white women, any freedom seeker went through these streets. Everybody went through these streets, and the city knows it. I don't understand it. I don't understand why we can't have a little piece of history when everybody else has so much.
Freddie's Brooklyn Roundhouse, where we turn the train around. Ooh, it's Freddie's Brooklyn Roundhouse. Send that train back out of sound. The train of eminent domain, it must turn around and move out of our Brooklyn town before it dies, to be replaced with high rise, with a stadium scam. Nobody knows 17 skyscrapers high behind a stadium. Freddie's Brooklyn Roundhouse, where we turn that train around.